Hey there, everybody. My name's Nate Taylor, and today we'll be discussing No Child Left Behind Act of 2001. So, to start us off, just to give you a little background of the bill, this was signed into law by George W. Bush on January 8th, 2002. At the time, there was a lot of concern that the American education system was failing, and that there was definitely some needed improvement, some education reform. So this bill was designed in order to improve the quality of education in U.S. schools. Um, in comparison to the rest of the world, there was a belief that the American system was behind, American education system was behind, and that could lead to some economic distress, and also it just wouldn't prepare our students effectively, um, which could lead to additional economic distress. Um, so some of the key points, key aspects of this bill, there was increased accountability for schools. They wanted to really kind of put the pressure on these schools in order for the schools to kind of take charge and really improve their education delivery. Um, this act required annual standardized testing for grades 3 to 8 in subjects such as reading and math. It was pretty much only reading and math that they required this testing in. These results also had to be broken down by race, disability, and socioeconomic status. And we'll talk about that later. There was some achievement gaps that this bill wanted to address. States also had to ensure all teachers were more qualified. They wanted better teachers, which would obviously lead to better education. To do this, they made sure that teachers had at least a bachelor's degree and state certification in the subjects they were teaching. Uh, and then they also wanted to address adequate yearly progress. They wanted to make sure year after year these schools were getting better. Um, and there were sanctions for schools that failed to meet this adequate yearly progress. For example, if a school did not meet the adequate yearly progress after 2 years, they were subject to sanctions, such as being forced to allow students to transfer to better performing schools. And if they didn't meet their adequate yearly progress after 3 years, they would have to offer free tutoring. So that's just a little background on the bill. Now we'll talk about historical context and some factors that led to the development of this bill. To start, one of the biggest or not really issues, but drivers of this bill was there was just bipartisan support for education improvements. So everyone in the United States kind of recognized that, yeah, the American education system was well behind, especially in comparison to the rest of the world, and there needed to be some improvements. So that really drove this bill to be created. Um, there was kind of drawn off the first point there. There was definitely some concern for a failing education system, especially in relation to international counterparts. Um, at the time, the workforce was becoming very, very highly skilled. So there was definitely concern that our education was not up to par in relation to the rest of the world, which put a ton of pressure on the federal system to improve America's education. Um, I just talked about it a little bit, but there was also some achievement gaps at the time, especially between white students and minority students. So this bill was designed to kind of help close these gaps and close these racial disparities. Um, and and kind of drawing off the first 2 points, economically, there was definitely some concern that the failing or education system would lead to a worsening economy for the United States. So there were several key events and figures um, centered around this bill. So, like I said, George W. Bush was the one who signed this in 2002. There were several legislative actions and bills that led to the development of No Child Left Behind. Um, so this bill actually kind of amended and almost revamped the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. That bill was signed by Lyndon B. Johnson, and that was really one of the first kind of education reform bills um, that was signed in America. Obviously, it kind of drove this bill, No Child Left Behind. There was also a report in 1983 called A Nation at Risk. This was released by the U.S. Secretary of Education at the time. That was Terrell H. Bell. Like I said, it was 1983, and it called for urgent improvements in education. And it was based on several statistics that showed a decreased quality of education in America. Um, in this report, the authors demonstrated that the nation was at risk and expressed concern that America's preeminence in commerce, industry, science, and technological innovation is being overtaken by competitors throughout the world, mainly due to a failing education system. So there was also Improving America's Schools Act in 1994. So this so it kind of went Elementary and Secondary Education Act, Improving American Schools Act, and then No Child Left Behind. So the Improving America Schools Act was signed by President Bill Clinton at the time. This bill reauthorized the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and it amended it. It included reforms such as providing extra help to disadvantaged students and holding schools accountable for their results at the same level as other students. Um, Ultimately, though, the No Child Left Behind was replaced in 2015 by the Every Student Succeeds Act of 2015, which was signed by President Barack Obama. This act rescinded several of the, I guess, negative or more unfavorable portions of No Child Left Behind. This bill kind of gave the states a lot more power in regards to their education. Um, for example, the states were able to determine when and how often these standard tests were administered, and it eliminated requirements that teachers had to be highly developed, which allowed the states to kind of develop their own teacher qualifications guidelines. So these are just a few of the key events and figures that led to the development of No Child Left Behind. So now we'll just kind of talk about the I guess, efficacy of No Child Left Behind. So the findings are pretty mixed, um, but I did find some improvements. Dee and Jacob found improvements in mathematics, specifically in minority groups. So there was a closure of that achievement gap, um, and that was amongst elementary school kids. Um, It also found, just due to the increased qualification requirement, that teachers were uh, better compensated, and there was more teachers with bachelor's degrees, so that it definitely helped in that aspect. And the National Assessment of Education Practice, which is what's known as the nation's report card, found an achievement bump at the time of passage of No Child Left Behind and a decade after. So there were some findings that demonstrated a positive effect, especially in regards to um, the impact that No Child Left Behind made in terms of education, and actually there were some positive impacts for the teachers as well. So that was good, but there was also some negatives that came out of it. Um, so because the bill was heavily tested, or required heavy testing on math and reading, um, in turn there was a big emphasis in schools on just teaching math and reading, which would lead to a decreased amount of time spent on other subjects such as social studies or the sciences. So the kids were not receiving necessarily a more overall education, but were really just kind of hammering home on math and reading. Um, so the scores in math and reading did improve, but like I said, in subjects such as social studies or history or chemistry, the scores, the students weren't necessarily receiving proper education in those subjects. So that was one area that was pretty heavily argued against this bill. Teachers, not necessarily the teacher's fault, but there was a major focus on test material and material because there was such an emphasis on standardized testing and improving results and meeting that adequate yearly progress, there was a huge focus on just what would be on the test, teaching kids how to test and what would be on the test. And kind of talking to that first point, the kids weren't really receiving a more holistic education. So that was another downside of this bill. Um, and then some states did not necessarily face consequences for poor performance. So if you look at the graph in the bottom right there, you can see on the left side, that was states with schools facing consequences under No Child Left Behind. So if you can see, for example, Texas is one that kind of sticks out to me. They almost face no consequences. And then if you look on the right, that's the percent of fourth graders below basic level of reading. And so where they face no consequences, almost a little over 40-ish% of their fourth graders still couldn't read at that level. So you could see there was kind of an unfair, I guess, some states would face consequences and others wouldn't. So that was another drawback to this bill. And the final drawback was challenges. There was a lot of challenges in meeting adequate yearly progress. And that was a lot of schools just didn't have the resources to help educate the kids properly and provide students with everything they needed. So then when they didn't have that, then they would have to face sanctions for not meeting adequate yearly progress, and it would kind of be just a domino effect, and the school would just really struggle, and the students of that school would really struggle. So in summary, once again, this bill was signed by George W. Bush, and it was created due to concerns of a failing education. This bill heavily focused on standardized testing, schools meeting adequate yearly progress, and improved teacher qualifications. It did lead to improved school scores in math and reading. It led to improved teacher compensation and improved teacher qualification. Some drawbacks of this bill, though, were that there was a heavy focus on reading, math, and a heavy focus on just what's on the test and testing material. And then in 2015, this was replaced by the Every Student Succeeds Act of 2015, and that was signed by President Barack Obama. So, thank you.